Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Some people say marriage takes work, but nobody warns you about the difference between normal relationship work and constantly walking on eggshells around someone who thinks they're never wrong. My name is Jason, and this is the story of how I went from saying I do to throwing my wedding ring across the room in less than 2 months, all because I finally stopped ignoring what everyone calls red flags. Looking back, I should have seen it coming from day one. But when your mom has been asking about grandchildren, you start to think maybe it's time to get serious about finding someone to settle down with. That's exactly what happened when my mother decided she was tired of waiting for me to find a wife on my own. I was 31, had a good job in corporate America, owned my own apartment, and according to my mom, I was getting too old without getting married and giving her grandchildren. Never mind that 31 isn't exactly ancient. In her mind, I was practically an old bachelor who needed immediate intervention. So my mother did what concerned mothers do best. She started networking with other mothers who had unmarried daughters. It didn't take long before she connected with a friend whose daughter Carol was 29 and was apparently also facing parental pressure to settle down. Our mothers arranged for us to meet, which felt incredibly formal and awkward. It was like a job interview where both candidates were being evaluated for the position of future spouse. Our first date was weird as we were getting to know each other. Carol seemed nervous, I was definitely nervous, and we both knew our mothers were probably sitting at home waiting for a full report on how things went. We made polite conversation about our jobs, our families, and our hobbies, but everything felt scripted and unnatural. Carol was beautiful. That was obvious from the moment I saw her. But beauty and compatibility are two very different things, and that first meeting didn't tell me much about whether we'd actually get along. By the second and third interaction, things warmed up considerably. Once we got past the initial awkwardness of knowing we'd been set up by our mothers, Carol and I started having more natural conversations. She was smart and had opinions about things that, although they differed from mine, made some sense to me. We discovered we had some things in common. We both loved trying new restaurants, enjoyed hiking on weekends, and had similar goals about saving money and building stable careers. Carol also seemed to appreciate that I wasn't pushing for anything physical or trying to rush into a serious relationship right away. In our conversations during those early meetings, we both agreed to follow things slowly, even though our mothers wanted us to be something more serious immediately. We could both feel the family pressure to move quickly toward engagement and marriage, but we wanted to actually get to know each other first before making any major commitments. This decision to take our time turned out to be smart. After all, it gave us a chance to see how we interacted in different situations and whether we genuinely enjoyed each other's company or were just going through the motions because our families expected it. As the months went by, Carol and I saw each other more frequently and started sharing more personal things about ourselves. We'd meet for dinner after work, spend weekends exploring the city together, and have long phone conversations at some point. I learned that Carol was incredibly driven about her marketing career and had specific plans for advancing to management positions within the next few years. She was organized, ambitious, and had clear ideas about how she wanted her life to progress. I admired her focus and determination, even though sometimes it felt like she had everything planned out to the smallest detail. Carol learned that I was more laid back about life planning, but equally serious about my work in software development. I enjoyed problem solving and building applications, but I was more flexible about where my career path might lead. I valued work-life balance and didn't feel the need to control every aspect of my future. After our 6th month of getting to know each other, we decided to try being in a real relationship rather than just casually dating. This felt like a natural progression since we enjoyed spending time together, and both our families were supportive of us becoming more serious. For me, Carol seemed to have the homely nature I wanted in a woman. She was family-oriented, responsible with money, and talked about wanting to create a stable home life with the right person. She was also beautiful. So I didn't mind that our relationship had started through family matchmaking rather than a romantic meeting. I didn't really understand the motivation behind why Carol had accepted me as a potential partner, but it was nice that she was giving us a chance to build something real together. Sometimes family introductions work out because both people are genuinely looking for a serious relationship rather than just casual dating. Initially, everything went well for the first few months of our official relationship, with both our families supporting us and encouraging the progression toward something more permanent. Our parents would invite us to family gatherings together, and we were treated like a couple who were clearly heading toward engagement and marriage. But soon, Carol and I began to have minor disagreements that often blew up into serious fights. What would start as a simple difference of opinion about something would escalate into major arguments about our fundamental compatibility and values. To Carol, she always felt like she was right about everything and believed I should apologize regardless of what issue we were having or who had actually caused the problem. Even when the disagreement was clearly about something subjective, she expected me to admit I was wrong and say sorry for taking a different position. To me, Carol wasn't accountable enough for her own role in our conflicts, and often blew minor issues into something much bigger than they needed to be. If I disagreed with her about anything, she'd interpret it as me not respecting her intelligence or not caring about her feelings, which wasn't true at all. These patterns started becoming obvious pretty quickly, but with the help of both our families, these issues were usually resolved before they could damage our relationship permanently. Our mothers would talk to us separately about the importance of compromise, and our fathers would remind us that all couples have disagreements that need to be worked through. The family involvement actually made things more complicated because Carol and I never really learned how to resolve conflicts between ourselves. Instead, we'd get frustrated with each other, complain to our parents, and then get lectures about making our relationship work without actually addressing the underlying communication problems. After 2 years of knowing each other and 1.5 years of dating, I proposed to Carol on her birthday, and she accepted enthusiastically. By that point, our families had been dropping hints about engagement for months, and it felt like the natural next step in our relationship progression. The proposal itself was romantic and went exactly as I'd hoped. She seemed genuinely excited about planning our wedding. Almost immediately after the engagement, we began planning for the wedding. Both our mothers threw themselves into the preparations with enthusiasm, and we set a date for the following spring. The guest list quickly grew to over 200 people, and the planning became a full-time project for both our families. After about a month of being engaged, Carol moved in with me, but that decision brought its own set of challenges that we hadn't anticipated. Living together full-time was very different from spending weekends together and gradually getting to know each other's habits and preferences. Carol turned out to be a perfectionist who wanted things to be done her way in every aspect of our shared living space. She had specific ideas about how the kitchen should be organized, when laundry should be done, how furniture should be arranged, and even how groceries should be stored in the refrigerator. At first, I tried to accommodate her preferences because I wanted us to be happy living together. But it quickly became clear that Carol wasn't interested in compromise or finding ways to blend our different approaches to household management. She wanted me to adopt her methods completely and couldn't understand why I might prefer doing things differently. As our wedding approached, we constantly had fights about household issues, family obligations, and wedding planning decisions, which created serious doubt in my mind about whether we should actually get married. The stress of planning a large wedding, combined with the challenges of living together, was revealing sides of both of us that we hadn't seen during our dating period. But with both families already deeply invested in our wedding plans and having spent thousands of dollars on deposits and arrangements, the marriage held together despite my growing concerns. Everyone kept telling us that pre-wedding stress was normal and that we'd be much happier once the actual wedding was over and we could settle into married life. Within the first month of our marriage, we had a major fight over whose responsibility it was to always keep the house clean. This wasn't just about dividing chores fairly. It was about Carol's expectation that the house should look perfect at all times, and her belief that I wasn't contributing enough to maintaining her standards. Carol worked full-time in marketing, and I worked full-time in software development, but she seemed to think that housework was primarily my responsibility since I worked from home 2 days a week. She'd come home from the office and immediately start pointing out things that needed to be cleaned, organized, or put away properly. I suggested that we hire a maid service to help us out once or twice a week, since we both had demanding jobs and neither of us particularly enjoyed cleaning. This seemed like a reasonable solution that would reduce stress for both of us and eliminate the source of our biggest arguments. But Carol refused my suggestion completely, saying she didn't feel safe having someone else around the house with our valuables and personal belongings. She was convinced that hiring outside help would lead to theft or privacy violations, even though I assured her we could hire from a reputable, bonded service with good references. When I tried to explain that I genuinely didn't have time to do house chores to her standards while also maintaining my career responsibilities, she refused to accept that as a valid excuse. According to Carol, other husbands manage to work full-time and still keep their houses spotless, so my time constraints weren't legitimate. After several rounds of this same argument with no resolution in sight, I finally said, "Fine, let the house be dirty until whenever. I'm not going to kill myself trying to meet impossible standards while working full-time." I thought this would end the discussion and maybe force her to reconsider the maid service option. But Carol immediately snapped at my response, accusing me of never seeing sense in anything she said and being deliberately stubborn about household responsibilities. She said I was being disrespectful of her needs and refusing to be a true partner in our marriage. I decided to ignore her escalating tone and walk away from the argument, knowing from experience that Carol was likely to blow this issue into something much bigger if I continued engaging with her when she was already upset. I'd learned that sometimes the best strategy was to let her calm down before trying to have a rational conversation. But Carol followed me as I tried to leave the room, continuing her complaints and adding new accusations about my character and commitment to our marriage. She reminded me that maybe marrying me had been a mistake, and she started listing all the ways I had disappointed her since our wedding. I would have responded to defend myself, but I held back because I could see that she was being completely unreasonable and looking for a fight rather than trying to solve our actual problem. Instead, I decided to walk away and let her finish venting her frustrations without getting drawn into a bigger argument. But Carol followed me through the house, telling me how she regretted every day with me and how I wasn't man enough to handle the responsibilities of marriage. She said I was immature, selfish, and nothing like the husband she thought she was getting when she agreed to marry me. At that moment, something inside me just snapped. I pulled off my wedding ring, tossed it across the room, and said clearly, "Then let this be the last day you have to regret." I was done listening to someone tell me how much they hated being married to me while expecting me to work harder to make them happy. We spent the rest of that day being completely cold to each other, but I knew in my heart that I was done taking her constant criticism and unreasonable demands. The marriage had been a mistake, and I wasn't going to spend years trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken from the start. Carol probably thought this was just another fight that would blow over like all our previous arguments, and that we'd eventually apologize to each other and go back to our normal routine of tension and conflict. But she was wrong about my intentions this time. About a week later, I came home from work with divorce papers to end our marriage of less than 2 months. I had contacted a divorce attorney, explained our situation, and filed for divorce based on irreconcilable differences. The papers were professionally prepared and ready to be served. Carol was shocked when I handed her the documents. She quickly called her family and my family to inform them about the divorce papers, probably expecting them to talk sense into me and convince me to reconsider. Both sets of parents were surprised and upset about our decision to end the marriage so quickly. But my mind was already completely made up about ending our marriage. I had spent months ignoring red flags about Carol's controlling behavior and unrealistic expectations, and I wasn't willing to spend years being miserable just to avoid disappointing our families. I decided not to explain my reasoning to anyone who asked about our divorce. When family members called wanting to understand what had happened, I simply said that Carol and I weren't compatible as married partners, and that ending things quickly was better than dragging out an unhappy marriage. Carol tried to get anyone who would listen to talk sense into me about reconsidering the divorce. She reached out to my sister, mutual friends, and even my close coworkers, asking them to convince me that I was making a mistake by ending our marriage over household arguments. But these intervention attempts didn't change anything about my decision. I was completely fed up with tolerating her controlling behavior, constant criticism, and refusal to compromise on anything. I didn't want to continue living with someone who made me feel like I could never do anything right. The truth was that I'd been unhappy for months, but had convinced myself that marriage required sacrifice and that I needed to work harder to meet Carol's expectations. But when she told me she regretted every day with me, I realized that no amount of effort on my part was going to make her happy or change her fundamental attitude toward our relationship. Our divorce was finalized within a few months, and everything ended cleanly and legally. Since we'd only been married for such a short time and hadn't accumulated any shared assets or debts, the process was relatively straightforward and didn't require complicated financial negotiations. I was genuinely happy to be alone once again after spending so many months ignoring the red flags I had seen early in our relationship. The relief I felt after ending the marriage confirmed that I had made the right decision, even though it disappointed our families and surprised everyone who knew us. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned some valuable lessons about relationships, family pressure, and trusting my own instincts about compatibility. The biggest lesson was that you can't build a happy marriage with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect your opinions, needs, or contributions to the relationship. I also learned that family approval and traditional expectations aren't good enough reasons to stay in a relationship that makes you miserable. Our mothers had great intentions when they introduced us, but they couldn't have known that Carol and I would turn out to be incompatible as life partners. The family introduction aspect of our relationship had actually worked well initially, because it brought together two people who were genuinely looking for a serious commitment rather than casual dating. But compatibility can't be arranged or forced, and no amount of family support can fix fundamental personality conflicts. Carol's perfectionist nature and need to control every aspect of our shared life weren't things that would have improved with time or counseling. Those were core aspects of her personality that would have made any marriage difficult, regardless of who she was married to. My tendency to avoid conflict and hope that problems would resolve themselves also contributed to our issues. I should have addressed Carol's controlling behavior much earlier in our relationship, instead of hoping she'd become more reasonable once we got married. The whole experience taught me to pay attention to red flags during dating rather than assuming that marriage will magically fix personality conflicts or communication problems. If someone shows you patterns of behavior that concern you, believe what you're seeing rather than hoping they'll change. I'm grateful that our marriage ended quickly rather than dragging on for years, while we both became increasingly unhappy and resentful. Some couples stay trapped in bad marriages because they're afraid of disappointing their families or admitting they made a mistake, but that's not fair to anyone involved. Today, I'm much more selective about dating and much better at recognizing when someone's personality or expectations aren't compatible with mine. I'd rather be single than married to someone who makes me feel like I'm constantly failing as a partner. The ring-tossing moment was dramatic, but it was also the moment I finally stood up for myself and refused to accept being treated with constant disrespect. Sometimes you have to draw a hard line and stick to it, even when it disappoints people who care about you. Carol and I were both good people who wanted marriage and family, but we brought out the worst in each other rather than the best. Recognizing that incompatibility and ending things quickly was the kindest thing we could have done for both of us. I still believe in marriage and commitment, but now I understand the difference between working on normal relationship challenges and trying to force compatibility that simply doesn't exist. When someone tells you they regret every day with you, it's time to listen and act accordingly. The family pressure that brought us together initially wasn't malicious, but it did create expectations that made it harder for both of us to recognize when things weren't working. Sometimes parents want grandchildren and weddings so badly that they overlook obvious warning signs about their children's happiness. Looking back, I'm proud of myself for having the courage to end a marriage that wasn't working rather than settling for years of unhappiness just to meet other people's expectations. Life is too short to spend it walking on eggshells around someone who's never satisfied with your efforts. The divorce was one of the best decisions I ever made, because it freed both Carol and me to find partners who actually appreciate and respect us. Sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that a relationship isn't working and move on. I learned that marriage should make your life better, not turn every day into a battle over household chores and personality differences. When someone makes you feel like you're constantly failing as a partner, it's time to find someone who brings out your best qualities instead of your worst frustrations. The whole experience made me a better judge of character and taught me to trust my instincts about people's behavior patterns. Red flags exist for good reasons, and ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It just delays the inevitable reckoning. Today, I'm happier, more confident, and much better at setting boundaries in relationships. I know what I will and won't accept from a partner, and I'm not afraid to walk away when someone shows me they can't meet those basic standards of respect and consideration. Sometimes the shortest marriages teach you the most important lessons about what you need in a life partner. My 2-month marriage to Carol was brief, but it showed me exactly what I don't want in a relationship and gave me the confidence to demand better in the future.